A few months ago, I decided to take up an unusual game dev challenge. I challenged myself to create 10 video games in just 10 weeks. Now, if that seems a little crazy to you, you're probably right. I basically took the concept of a game jam and turned it into something more like a game marathon. So, why the hell did I do this to myself? Developing a game by yourself requires a lot of different skills. I'm talking not just coding, but modeling, animating, graphic design, sound design, music composition, etc., etc. I've made some games before, but there is an endless rabbit hole of stuff to learn and to improve on. As anyone who has learned another language will tell you, the best way to improve is to immerse yourself as fully as possible. So I sought to do that with this challenge. I have a lot of game ideas. Still, it can be hard to tell if a game will actually be fun before you make it. With this challenge, I could try out lots of ideas and see which ones rose to the top, both when it comes to gameplay and when it comes to popularity. That brings us to... I prefer to be open about this kind of thing, so I'll just say that, well, 10 games in 10 weeks! It's kinda catchy, right? I hoped, going in, that the idea itself would attract attention and help me build an audience, as ultimately that's what will decide if I can keep working as a solo dev. So, with that all in mind, let me take you on a journey. Honestly, I still think this is my best idea. It's basically if Wii Golf and Katamari Damacy had a baby. Everything the ball hits, sticks. The basic premise is chaotic enough, but once I added in boosters and trampolines, it reached a whole nother level. It's great, I love it. I was honestly dreading this first week, but to my pleasant surprise, things came together pretty smoothly, with no major bugs or other issues. However, I did learn some pretty harsh lessons on scope. My original plans included a suburban environment, a frisbee golf mode, practice levels, etc., and in retrospect, the thought that I could have possibly fit any of that is hilarious. Additionally, I forgot to account for a rather crucial element when I was planning how the week would go. Namely, I didn't plan out time for making a trailer, social media posts, a store page, any of it. As such, I ended up spending a good bit of the weekend working, which was something I had hoped to avoid, but kinda ended up being the norm moving forward. Still, minor hiccups aside, the game worked and was fun, and I was feeling pretty good. God, if week 1 was surprisingly easy, week 2 was my karma catching up to me. The idea was to create a sort of pacifist bullet hell game, where you have to make your enemies destroy each other. However, at a certain point you can activate a rage mode and go on the offensive. But you have to be careful because your house is filled with fragile stuff that you can break. On the face of it, that doesn't seem that much more complicated than week 1. However, the big difference is that week 2 required 3D animation, something that up until now I had largely avoided. So, naturally, I decided that now was the time to learn. Oh, and also include cloth physics, because I really liked the idea of the character wearing a bathrobe, I guess. This inclusion ate a lot of time, and the rest of the game definitely suffered. The gameplay is clunky and unintuitive, the music didn't turn out right at all, and the trailer is just objectively bad. Still, I kind of don't regret it. As it turns out, the later games in the challenge used tons of animation, which wouldn't have been possible without taking the L here. Really, I should have done some practice before starting the challenge, but, well, hindsight, 2020, etc., etc. After the chaos of week 2, I needed a game that was a little more laid back. The concept behind this one is that you can only see wherever there is sound, kind of like sonar. There were a lot of potential directions I could have taken this concept. For a while I wanted it to be a puzzle game, but then I realized I had no ideas for puzzles. There's also some obvious potential for a horror game, but that's not my thing. In the end, I focused on exploration and storytelling. You wander around, finding landmarks, and slowly piecing together the history of the location. The execution is clumsy, but the visuals and music came together really, really nicely, to the point that this is actually probably my personal favorite. The development of this one was pretty smooth, with one almost catastrophic exception. You see, Unreal Engine has a plugin that will tell you the volume of a sound at a given point in time. I then used this to calculate the radius that would be illuminated by that sound. However, on the final day, as I was preparing the game for release, I discovered that the plugin only works in the editor. That is, it stops working when the game is packaged for release, so the entire game was just pitch black. Anyway, I decided to just hard code in the appropriate radius for each source of noise, which thankfully didn't take super long. Still, lesson learned, do test releases earlier in the week to make sure nothing weird is going on. So this one's meant to be a twist on the tower defense genre, where you have to manually manage each of your units. The goal was to create something like Overcooked, where you constantly ride the edge between order and chaos. And it kind of works. However, looking back, I think it's held back by some pretty poor design decisions. Namely, when you hop in a machine, the camera switches to first person. This was cool on paper, but ultimately just ends up being annoying, especially because I also decided to make the machines slow and unwieldy to drive. This game also suffered from a trend that would go on to become pretty common, which I've since dubbed the overconfidence curve. For the first 3 days of each week, my confidence grows as I make a lot of progress up until the third day, where I start to think I might even be able to finish early this week. Then comes Thursday morning, where I catalog everything that's still left to do and realize I'm going to have to scramble to finish. One part of this game that I do really like is the music. It has this floaty, flute-like synth for the melody representing the ghost, while the accompaniment is full of crashes and harsh buzzes for the machines, and I think it comes together pretty nicely. Well, 0 points for guessing what inspired this game. It ended up being pretty fun and dynamic, with the player having to blast themselves back and forth across the map to catch each group of robots. It was also a pretty big step up in terms of animation and enemy behavior. I'm not super pleased with the music, and the physics system was a little, twitchy. But overall, I'd say this far exceeded my own expectations. I also just love these weapon trails, it's so satisfying. In fact, the biggest issue this week actually had nothing to do with the game itself. Rather, this was the first time I noticed that my gameplay recordings were kinda, awful? Turns out that my little laptop can't really handle playing and recording at the same time, so the video resolution plummets. I have a solution now, but it was too late to fix it for that week's trailer, so I just had to make do. I'm not a trail runner myself, but I have a deep love of the outdoors, and so have always found the concept of trail running to be pretty fascinating. When coming up with this game though, I immediately found myself at something of a crossroads. Should I make a typical infinite runner that just so happens to be set in the woods, or should I get rid of anything that's too gamey and focus on the pure, idealized experience of running through a beautiful landscape? In the end, I wasn't sure I could do the second option justice within the time limit, so I chickened out and included obstacles and a timer. Still, the overall experience is surprisingly immersive, especially with the music. Of all the games, I think I enjoyed making this one the most, mainly because I got to work a lot with the landscape and foliage systems in Unreal Engine, which are super powerful and satisfying. Plus, it just turned out really pretty. This game turned out to be surprisingly ambitious, as in it caught me completely off guard. Again, on the face of it, this doesn't seem like anything unusual. It's primarily built around this Blitz mechanic, where you throw your little magic knife thing and then zip towards it. There's these locked doors you have to open, keys hidden in crates that you can break, robots that you have to evade, so on and so forth. The thing is, all these little mechanics and their interactions took time, and together it really added up. This is actually the first time in the entire challenge that I caved and downloaded some 3D models instead of making them all myself. In the end, my opinion on this game is pretty mixed. It's okay, but it feels incohesive, and the Blitz mechanic in particular isn't very satisfying. It's also worth noting that at this point I was really starting to feel the fatigue of this multi-month challenge. Still, I had come way too far at this point to stop now, so I got the game done and moved forward. I started week 8 in a bit of a funk, but this game ended up coming together beautifully. The idea is basically taking a vampire and giving him the metabolism of a hummingbird, so if you don't drink blood every 9 seconds, you will die. What results is this weird, frantic maze/puzzle solver as you run around strategically deciding when and when not to feed. This was my first experiment with cell shading, which I instantly loved. Not only does it add this extra level of polish and cohesiveness to the visuals, but it also lets my computer record at slightly higher resolutions, which is nice. My proudest moment of this entire challenge was when I put together this candle flame. It might not be obvious why I'm so pleased with it, but basically it's just super elegant, really simple, but really effective. Shame that the candles in the game are way too small for anyone to ever notice, but whatever, it makes me happy. Originally, I planned for this week's game to be a puzzle game based around mirrors. So on the first day, I sat down and started prototyping, only to realize that, mirrors are actually a hard problem? So after wasting most of a day, I went back to my trusty spreadsheet and picked out a new idea, cat herder. Just like the name implies, the goal is to move a swarm of cats into designated areas, but the cats, being cats, don't really cooperate. Faced with even less time than normal, I leaned heavily into a super cutesy art style. This, I think, let me get away with models and animations that were objectively just janky, but in this context came across as cute and silly. Don't let the aesthetic fool you though, this game is kind of brutal. One last game, one last week. And of course, on this one, I decided to completely forget the lessons I had learned so far regarding scope. The basic premise is that you are a billionaire, steadily getting buried alive under piles and piles of money, so you have to spend that money as quickly as possible. In retrospect, perhaps a bit more brutal and political than I am comfortable with, but it's a really interesting visual and a cool way to get to grips with just how large a number 100 billion really is. A problem I had a lot of fun solving was how to render all those bills without tanking the frame rate. I had so much fun, in fact, that I spent the entire first day working on just that, before realizing that I still needed to make, the rest of the game. I had so many ideas for this one, like multiple levels, purchases that would require prerequisites, a flamethrower so you could literally just burn the money. But just like in the very first game, all those ideas had to be cut. Thankfully, what was left was still fun and interesting, so I can happily say that the challenge ended on a high note. After 2.5 months, I've made it. I've completed my challenge. That in itself is something to be happy about. Still, it's worth looking back on my original goals and considering, did I meet them? This one's easy. Absolutely, yes. I developed several big new skills like 3D animation and enemy AI, and an uncountable number of tricks and optimizations and new workflows. There's a lack of depth to some of that knowledge, but that's stuff I can continue to work on moving forward. Regarding gameplay, there are definitely some games that shone well above the rest, though I do feel like some games failed more because of my rushed execution rather than the idea itself being poor. Judging popularity, however, is a bit trickier. This is the total number of downloads each game received as of uploading this video. And it would be easy to look at this and say that obviously week 9 and 10 are the best games. However, I also posted about those two games in some pretty major subreddits, giving them a huge leg up over the others. So I think it's difficult to draw truly meaningful conclusions from this information. This one was better than it could have been, but still less than I'd hoped. I think I greatly overestimated the appeal of 10 games in 10 weeks. Many of my most liked posts didn't mention the challenge at all. And when judging each of these games in isolation, a lot of them aren't terribly impressive. Still, some audience is better than none, and it's something to build off of moving forward. So what comes next? Right now, I'm planning to make both Sticky Golf and Cat Herder into full releases, though none of this is set in stone. It's worth noting that the best performing game was Billionaire's Dilemma. However, a lot of the appeal of that game is based around anger towards real people. And while that catharsis is appealing, I'm not sure I really want to take it any further. Anyway, that's the current plan. Once those two games are done, who knows? I've got a lot of potential ideas, and really I'm just getting started. Here's to the next 10 weeks. Hey, thanks for watching through to the end. This is my first time making a video like this, so let me know your thoughts. All the games I made are free on itch.io, you can find the link in the description. Big thanks to Sebastian Log for his videos that inspired this challenge, and thanks to Prismatica Dev for all their helpful tutorials. Oh, and like and subscribe, I guess? That's always appreciated. Cheers!